Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the From Morning to Action, Powerfully Working Through Loss podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Damon Silas, and on today's episode, we have a very special guest. This is somebody who I've grown up with. She's like a sister from another mister to me. So she is actually a psychologist up in Boston, which is where I'm originally from, if you all don't know. And she's been doing this work for a really long time. She actually specializes and has done work with youth, doing some violence prevention and intervention. She primarily focuses on work with family systems at this time. But anyway, y'all, please do me a favor and welcome Crystal Johnson to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Crystal, do me a favor and say hello to the people and fill in anything that I may have missed in terms of what you do and all that good stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning and peace and love to your audience and yourself as well. You pretty much got it right. I've been a school psychologist. I've worked here in the Boston community like 25 plus years. Mm-hmm. I started out in child protection, moved up to violence prevention, working with youth, a lot of gang-involved youth. I'll probably talk a little bit about that later. There was a lot of loss I experienced there. Mm-hmm. And, now kind of a lot of that work, as many times in life, frames what you do later. So I really do a lot of family therapy work, and that's kind of what I love because it's a very important thing in our community. So I'm really into that now.
Okay. How did that transition happen for you?
Well, part of it was, so I was working for a program called the Boston Street Worker Program, just doing a lot of violence prevention, gang intervention, mediation, stuff like that. But there was just a lot of murder, a lot of death, and like any good self-respecting entry-level person, I was like, I got to go to grad school and change this. I'm changing the world.
Yes.
And,
right? That's what we all think, right?
It was too much, and I went to grad school, and I got into, school psychology and therapy, and I was always interested in family systems because mine was so fucked up. I don't know if you can swear on podcasts, sorry, but you know what I mean? So I was always interested in how they work, and then I did school psychology for a little while, and then I just decided, I needed to be more on the educational preventive side, and it just kind of morphed into that.
Okay. And it just must be really challenging work, I'm imagining, like you said, growing up and seeing the loss of lives, through murder and, and then working with family members, I'm guessing, who have experienced loss. So it sounds like it's been kind of all around you.
Right.
And actually, we'll talk a little bit about your own personal loss and what you want to discuss. But even somebody who's in the field of psychology who knows how to deal with loss, what has that been like for you working around it so much?
Well, the beauty of life, if you get to live it, is the growth that you go through. So, earlier in my career, it was very numbing, but I didn't realize at the time I was building resilience, right? Because it was just very numbing. So it was easy to I remember having conversations with your brother, oh yeah, I just was over here, this dude got shot, this dude got stabbed, nothing, you know what I mean? Not because I didn't feel it, but it was just so commonplace,
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where I was 30 years old, and I had already been to 30 funerals of people under 30.
Wow.
And that just gave me cause for pause. And then I had a client that was involved in a high-profile murder, and I just had to stop doing it then, you know what I mean? Because it kind of beat me down. And then, and I went and I did therapy then.
Okay.
Because, you need to do that, and I just didn't know what was going on with me, because as with any trauma and loss, there's the high level of distractibility, inability to focus, increased irritability, all these things. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? Yes. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just thinking about even your post the other day on Facebook, and you were saying there was a hashtag that you use, which is therapists need therapy too.
Right.
And, to be that self-aware at that moment, like, wait, my focus is off, I'm irritable, I need some help.
Right.
That takes a lot, I think, a lot of internal work, just reflective work to say, it's time for me to do something about this.
Right. I'm not necessarily sure if that first time that I did it when I was transitioning away from the street worker program, if it was that reflective or more helplessness. Right?
Okay. All right.
Like, you know what I mean? Because I was like, I have to do something because, I was just, how we roll back in the day a little bit, just, sometimes with no care, just doing things freely and not, really thinking about the consequences for me. You know what I mean? So I just realized that probably was not a path I needed to go down of, drinking too much or self-medicating or doing whatever, which were all the things that were happening. But when you're functional and you're not kind of like living in these streets doing that, you don't see that it's really a manifestation of other things, right?
Yeah.
Especially when I was younger, because it's just like, we party, Brooklyn, we having a party, blah 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 blah.
Right.
I mean, really, that's what it was, and by socializing and networking. Maybe at the time I thought I was helping myself, but I really was just self-medicating and avoiding,
Yeah. No, and that's so funny, because you're right. Like, we kind of get into these patterns of behavior where we're like, oh, we're just young and having fun, versus what are you hiding? What are you masking? What are you trying to get away from or avoid, like you said? And finally getting to that point, like, this doesn't work for me anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it did. I don't even remember when I got to that. It might have been the same day that I realized that I was going to go to grad school and save the world. But
it's a profound day, huh?
Yeah, right. A lot of catharsis.
Right.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was a result of me being that mindful, but it wasn't. It wasn't.
Let's do this. I'm going to shift just a little bit because I know you wanted to talk about one loss in particular. Clearly, you've experienced a lot in your line of work. But tell me the loss that you had been thinking of when I reached out to you. And by the way, let me just say, too, I didn't necessarily have anybody lined up for the next show. And then you had actually posted something on Facebook, which I thought was really profound. And it was just one of those posts about this loss and like, how do we deal with it? Like, do we keep pushing? Do we keep moving? Or do we stop and pause and reflect? Or do we get to this point of hopelessness and helplessness? So it was really, I just appreciate your vulnerability on that post, which led me to then reach out to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, do me a favor and just tell, what loss you wanted to talk about in particular.
Wow. I guess I was thinking the particular generality of loss because I feel like people lose people every day that either they're working with them or that are close to them. And definitely the loss of my mother recently made a major, major mark and change on my life. The loss of my father, ironically, the day that I became a woman is the day that my father died. So in some ways, I've always said to myself, I became a woman twice in one day through no choice of my own. In the sense of, I was 12. This was a few days before my 13th birthday. So the day that nature decided to rear its ugly head, it definitely reared its ugly head. in both ways. So that has always stayed with me. But the effects were very different than with my mom, because my dad was young. My mom was 15. He was 17 when I was born. And, he tried to be there, but I mean, what 17-year-old really could? You know what I mean? So it's not like he was a constant in my life. And then when he reconnected, because he had some struggles of his own, when we reconnected and he tried to be that constant, he was then murdered. And then it was high profile. And I really didn't have an understanding of the context. But when my aunt sent me that article, it just was like, I think I told you, it was like, I'm reliving a trauma that I don't even know when I experienced it in some ways. You know what I mean? Because I'm seeing it through the memories of what other people have told me about my dad. So that, you know what I mean? So that made that, very, very bittersweet.
Right.
And when my mom passed, that definitely rocked my world, just because of the way that it happened and the unexpectedness. And then, we know that it happens to people, but you can never be prepared for things like that. Right. You can never be prepared. And no matter what anyone says or the support, it's like one of those things that you have to just go through. And I think that's the hardest part, because you're not comforted. You know what I mean? So it's like, and I think that what was different is the disconnect with my dad and him not being there. It's a different level of comforting. You know what I mean? It's like, I was never comforted by that, but intellectually, I could compartmentalize it, I guess maybe is a good word to say. Whereas, you have your parents that you've grown up with, that you spent time with. And like I said my mother was 15. So we literally grew up together. So for her to go, there was no comforting in that. You know what I mean? It's like, it just was, you have to work through that pain, because, I don't know, it's just hard to explain. And maybe you experienced it with your dad too. You know what I mean? It's like, you could have been around other people whose dads have passed, but there still was nothing comforting about it. Because it's like, that's your dad, Right.
And like you said, I mean, you can intellectualize it all you want, but when you're emotionally close to that person, and when you have that particular, bond and relationship, even preparing for the loss, let alone something that's sudden, preparing for the loss, it's completely difficult, and so if you're talking a sudden loss or something that's unexpected, and somebody that a mom is a mom, like, I can only imagine.
Yeah, well, it's just, I don't even know, because afterward, one of the things I will say that did help for a little while, and even though I didn't do it a lot, is that your sister-in-law invited me to a group on Facebook of other women who had lost parents and mothers at a time. And that, I will say that helped a little bit, is just for the venting.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Being able to vent in an arena where people could understand. I won't say the name of the group because it's a private group, but
okay.
For the other, because of the other woman, they made it private. But that definitely was helpful for the short term.
Just having a community of support around you.
Yeah, and I mean, it was hard for me to do that because, like, I'm in the field, but I'm also a hater, right? So I'm in the human service field, but I gotta be honest, like, I'm also a hater of the feel-good Carrie Sherry's at times, so.
So, like, you can do the work, but to be a recipient of it is a lot.